Login accepted.
Wow, that's a cool intro, and every speaker will say that, right? But it's really cool. So thank you for being here, first of all, because it's a very ambitious program, so many great speakers, so I really appreciate that you're here. Who has already heard of social debt? Any hands? Oh, cool. It is improving, that's a good thing. Who has already heard of technical debt? Everybody, yes. And that's expected, right? So social debt is a very new topic. It's something that's very unspoken of, very unheard of. And actually what I'm going to share is, well, what the current state of thinking is on social debt, where we are, and why it really should matter that you're aware of this concept and that you are learning about this concept. So that's my objective for today, because it actually influences your team's success. And I'm going to show you how. So first, let's start with a story. So in 2014, I was working at a very traditional insurance company, and I was looking at all these cool companies, and I thought, well, I want to go there as well, because all these companies have one thing in common. Everybody is so happy who works there. Not through all the time, I guess, but at that stage, 2014, because they were doing innovative things. And the way they were doing that led to having so much more value, so much more productiveness, and in the end, so much more happiness for everybody who was working on these projects. So at that stage, I thought, well, let's see where it takes us. So we started doing a greenfield rebuild of our full insurance administration. Because it had such great stories, happy developers, much higher quality, much more value, better collaboration, higher speed of change, and yay, revenue increase. So it should also be the best way for the CEO to go. So we thought, well, cool, we're going to do a whole greenfield rebuild, and then we're going to be this unicorn company, just like all these high performance in the market. So what we did is we did the whole insurance scope to microservices. So everything went into microservices, front end, back end, all the batches, all the reports, all the integrations. We did full CI/CD, which was a hell of a job back in 2014. So everything with full automated testing, everything. And then we thought, well, unicorn, success, cultural change, acceleration, we're there. Super cool. And somehow it worked. So yes, we thought we have caught the unicorn. Because everything was running multiple times per day deployments, we replaced 31 million lines of COBOL by around 400K lines of Java, which is amazing. That it's not like the least verbose language, right? So we thought, well, we're going to do this again, move to another company, and also there, start with microservices, now in the cloud, which will be even better. Add some things, happy buzzwords like infra as code and config as code. Make everything immutable, everything scalable. All the buzzwords bingo, basically. And much to my surprise, it didn't work, not at all. One of the biggest failing projects I worked in. And it was on me, right? Because I really underestimated a lot of things that were influencing this company and this project. Because one of the core concepts of this previous journey was that we were allowed to go to production very early and to learn in production how to get it right. And in this case, this company had already tried a rebuild for 3 times and communicated that to the customers. So they said, well, sorry, it's nice that you have this small component ready, but you cannot release that because our customers have massive expectations. And if this is what we're delivering, they will be massively disappointed. So we have to wait. I wasn't allowed to put anything in production. The whole collaboration was broken because while some of the company was trying to do this whole greenfield rebuild, there was another part of the company still delivering value every day. And these guys, there were no women in the team, they were called the dinosaurs because they were all old and writing COBOL. And that did something to the way that the teams were collaborating because these people felt unacknowledged, unappreciated, being called dinosaurs all the time, while they were actually the only ones making the company any money at that stage. So there was a social thing going on, some kind of villainy that wasn't helpful, because these guys were really not helping to integrate some of the new services that were being pushed out there with the old code base, because they were kind of fed up with it. So we had many deployments, but no releases, because we weren't allowed to put anything in, like releasing to one of the customers because of this massive disappointment. And also, failure was really not an option, because one of the two CEOs was brought into the company, taking the product that he built and led with him. So it was part of a merger. And we were actually replacing that product because it was of bad quality. But this director was in a way influencing, like, no, I don't want you to replace it because that will be, well, basically my loss of value. What I brought to the company will be deprecated. So a lot of social things were actually blocking us to do anything at all. So that's when I found out I really got the relationship wrong. I need water as well. So it's not that you become a unicorn company when you do cool tech stuff. It's only a unicorn company that can do cool tech stuff. So then the question is, how to become a cool unicorn company? Because in the end, software is built by people. And this is something that Melvin Conway already understood in 1968. So any organization, this is Conway's law, that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So whenever you have, for instance, what I was discussing, like the whole sharing villainy, the dinosaurs against the new kids on the block, when these people are not communicating, when these people are not working together, they are very unlikely to build any systems that actually integrate together, because these people are not integrating. It is impossible to do so, and Melvin Conway already found that in 1968. So the implications of Conway's law is actually that your system will inherit all your social dysfunctions. If you have an unclarity of structure between people, change in direction, social conflict, misalignment in teams, cultural fear, or a lack of ownership, all these things will end up in your system. Your technical quality will be affected by your social quality. And this is what we call social debt. Social debt is the cumulative cost connected to adverse effects within a development community. And when we compare social debt to tech debt, which is its much well-known brother, so tech debt is really the work that's owed to the IT system, while social debt is the work that's owed to the IT team. It's similar, it's just different focus. There's code smells, and social debt talks about community smells. So you can actually measure and identify them when you are aware of them. And you have to repay tech debt by investment in code, where you repay social debt naturally by investment in people and teams and collaboration. So I hope that makes sense. Time for my introduction. I'm Kim, mother of two. I like traveling, so I love being in Krakow. I like vintage shopping. Krakow has many, many vintage places, so that's awesome. I'm a CTO at Schubert Phillips. Schubert Phillips is an outsourcing company, so it's really different than contracting. We take care of mission-critical problems for companies that have that are important for the Netherlands, basically. So banks, energy suppliers, big retail companies, so supermarkets, things like that, railways, the ports. And it's really nice to work there because when you are in the mission-critical space, you get to build IT in the way that you actually want to, because it matters so much in the core and the heart of the company that they actually have the time and space to allow to build it to perfection, which is something that really much is something that I much appreciate. So, an introduction to social debt. As said, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. So, if you're here to get all the solutions, this is not the current state of thinking of social debt. This is really introductionary. So I hope that you'll bear with me and that it's mainly focused on inspiration and to get your thinking flowing, basically. And I hope that does spark the start of change. I'll explain something about the impact of social debt, the causes, how to identify them, and how to repay them. So impact. Well, in the end, human connections really matter. Because what was found in various articles and various scientific research is that social debt predicts technical debt. So there have been many investigations like, does the architecture predict it? Does the tech stack predict it? The quality of people, the age of the system, the size of the projects that you're building. And all of these factors matter. But what was found in scientific research is that the one factor that matters even more than all these others is social debt. So this is why you should care. And just an example to maybe get this more, into real-life examples. So, for instance, we have a new guy on the team. And when he joined, we were totally under high work pressure. So everybody was running their ass off to get the work done, and nobody was paying any attention to this new guy. And this is a community smell that's called newbie freeriding. It's like, here's Confluence, there's Jira, good luck, this was your onboarding. And that's not okay, of course, because that leads to disengagement, to depression. This guy was really feeling a solist in a new team where he was so much looking forward to join the team. And it was even worse because, of course, it's not just the person that's very much disappointed. This is how it ends up in your tech stack. There will be no adherence to your architecture and process because this guy has no chance to actually live up to these standards because nobody shared them, nobody told them. So every little bit of code that he produced was of a different style, different quality. This is where you gain some tech debt. Lack of onboarding, very simple. Another example is there was this company which was founded as a mission to deliver equality in the insurance market. In that stage, all the premiums in Holland were undisclosed. So you would just go to a company, you would pay something, and you had no idea if this was a fair price. And this company was founded to change that. So they were publicly exposing all the premiums of all the insurance companies. So their whole founding mission was about equality. And this kind of ended up in their company as a cultural caricature, because equality became so important to them that also in their code, they would not allow any hierarchy. Everybody owned every repository. They had big mono-repositories that were handling things that should have been separated in various libraries. So this is a smell called a hyper community, where the community starts to be a caricature of its cultural values. And that ended up to conformity and anchoring, so you could not divide, like, hey, I want actually to assign some ownership, maybe move to some inner source model or whatever. And that ended up into faulty software components, because they had these big God classes handling everything. They also lacked mandate. Nobody could say, I'm going to change the tech for this repository, because nobody had ownership on it. Nobody felt ownership on it. And it also led to slowness, which is very natural. This is one of my recent examples. Bureaucracy-driven design is what I call it. And it's the smell is institutional isomorphism. Basically, this is a company that says, well, we have very strict organization. It's a company that says we have Agile in a company of 8,000 developers, so it's big. That means that everything has to follow some certain change approval flow. And when they went Agile, that meant that you had to put things on the backlog 12 months in advance. So there goes your agility down the drain, right? And these 12 months are blocking teams. So what are the teams doing in response? They are using config as code to actually deliver things that should have been code. Why? Because your configuration was allowed to change without the 12-month approval. So they had misdesign simply because the company was driving them to work around it. So this is, again, something that ends up in your tech, which is a social issue. So just some other examples like, hey, did you ever work around an abstraction because it was too hard to do it the right way? Did you ever just approve a PR because, well, it was really complex and you were really busy? Maybe just approve it because the guy that or the girl that handed the PR to you was really hard to discuss any changes with, and you didn't want to have the conflict. Maybe you refactor somebody's code without explaining why. Not applying a refactoring because you don't want to have a discussion with the product owner, and he says, well, no, just do the change, the functional change, and don't do any refactoring. Or maybe not defy a proposed solution because it may affect your social position in the group. So these kind of examples are all social examples that will affect the technical quality of your product. And in the end, that means it's always the organization. So we tend to focus a lot on the code. We tend to apply tech solutions for something that's actually a social problem. So let's do different. Let's see how you incur social debt. And the question for me is basically, what kind of leader do you want to be? So in my humble opinion, everybody is a leader. Everybody is a leader in some area of this profession. Because maybe you have the most depth of knowledge on a certain piece of tech. Maybe because you're leading the process, you're leading collaboration, you're the most innovative mindset, you're the most mentoring person, you're the most coaching person. So everybody has an area of expertise where you are leading the team. And then the question is, when you are leading a certain change, what kind of leader do you want to be? And one of my colleagues compared it to a seagull. So there's many leaders who are like a seagull. They just fly over, drop their shit and move on. And that's not the way that leadership should be, right? And because this is very hurtful. When you are a leader, a seagull leader, that means that you leave people basically just hanging there. Because any change will have quite some effect. And this is the Kubler-Ross change cycle. So whenever people are faced with change, they first start to deny it. Then they get angry. Then they get depressed. And only after that, they are open to experiment, to accept it, and to even commit to it. So if you are a seagull leader, you leave people there in denial, not wanting to face any of the change. And then a few months later, you're going to say, well, this person is very reluctant to change and he's a bad performer. No, he's not a bad performer. You are a bad leader. So what kind of leader do you want to be? That's basically the question. Because every phase in this change cycle actually asks for a whole bunch of soft skills. And if you master these soft skills, that's when you are able to make sure that you don't incur social debt. So it's the lack of soft skills of leaders that leads to the incurrence of social debt. If you don't communicate clear why you want to change, people will deny. If you don't have empathy in the phase where people are struggling to accept a change, people will be angry or in fear. If you are not supporting, teaching people when they are experimenting, people will get frustrated and stuck. So, and of course, at the end, you need to appreciate people because it's hard work to work through this change cycle. And there's a lot of these things. So there's a lot of people changes that actually lead to collaboration, communication, or coaching gaps. Process changes that need attention to coordination or composition, team composition. Tech changes that lead to skill gaps, and business changes that lead to context or culture gaps. Because these are the critical factors of teamwork. This is what you need to take care of as a leader. And I think there's very big lack of awareness on all these factors. It's not just that you say, hey, we're going to change and this is what we're going to do. You need to make sure that you also think about, hey, how do we communicate between each other in this team? What can people expect of that? Do we have the right setup of people, the right combination? When you have a combination of personalities, do you actually have some kind of compatibility within these personalities? Are we coaching people in the right way? And the lack of that is often the way to incur social debt. If you look at these factors, it's also very obvious that an agile transformation creates social debt. Because an agile transformation will change the communication, the context, the collaboration, the composition. So it will change every one of these critical factors of teamwork. And if you don't guide that, that means that your agile transformation will be a big failure. Because people are lost in change. The same goes for Scrum. So Scrum has a very big effect of exactly telling how things should be done. They're very process-oriented. And this is called a community smell. It's called priggish members. These are pointlessly precise conformity to process. So you have to have a retrospective at the end of a sprint, always. And if you start defying that, people will get angry. This is really one of those community smells, because that means that you're not allowed to think anymore. What is the best way for our team to perform in the current state? Well, actually, if you look at the Scrum Guide, the developers are always accountable for basically the quality of their product. And in reality, what I see in Scrum is that a lot of mandate is at the product owner, and very little mandate is actually in the team. This is a social issue. A DevOps transformation also needs this guidance, because if you think about it, in a DevOps transformation, there is change on every one of these factors. That's unavoidable, because people who were not in the same team are going to start working together. And that's a big change. An example of an insurance company in the Netherlands where that wasn't handled very well is a company that went to BizDevOps. And in their BizDevOps transformation, they thought it would be nice to make business in charge, fully in charge of priorities. No surprise. They never thought it would be a very good idea to prioritize any technical quality issues or any repayment of tech debt. So what they did is change was the absolute priority. And of course, because they want availability and because they want value delivered to the customer, the amount of change windows that the teams got actually went down from being able to push out change every day to 1 day per month on a Sunday from 7 to 10. That was the only change window they had. No surprise is that the quality of their tech was lacking. They couldn't do any lifecycle management. They couldn't do any patching. They couldn't do any tech improvements. And that means they were completely stuck. And that's actually because there was insufficient guidance to basically what's the collaboration model in our new way of working. So that's how you incur it. How do you know you have it? How do you identify it? And this is basically the cool thing. These community smells that I was talking about are actually your early warnings. So if you learn how to identify community smells, if you learn how to recognize them, that means that you can learn about you having social debt a little bit earlier than when it's already there fully in your face. So that will be interesting. How do we actually identify and measure community smells? Well, there's 2 ways to do that, basically. So one is, if this relationship between code smells and community smells is so tight, as found in research, because community smells are social debt and lead to a lower technical quality, then it means that we can also use this relationship to point back. So what we can do is we can see what kind of tech debt do you have in your repositories. And from the combination of tech debt, derive that there's actually an underlying social issue. And there are some examples here. So when you have a combination of a certain tech debt, you can actually derive the fact that you have community smells, that you have social debt, from the tech debt that you have. Another way to do it is, well, you can also directly observe community smells. And this is done with a technique called social network mapping. Because when there is something in this social network going on, then it should also become observable. This is one example. There's the lone wolf effect, which is one of the community smells. The lone wolf effect basically is that there are some people working in isolation. They're part of a team, but they're doing their own work, their own projects in isolation from the rest. That means that the technical quality will probably not adhere to the technical quality of the full team, because this person is kind of doing his own thing, making his own decisions, and that's not normally the way to actually have well-aligned code. And the way to measure that is basically, in your repositories, you can actually see how many contributors are there, and in your social structures, such as Slack, email, you can actually see how much communication is there between people. And there's measurement systems that combine these pieces of information into observability of community smells. This is very new. And this is an example. So this is from a slide of Adam Thornhill. He works for Code, or he founded CodeScene. And it provides very nice graphs of your repository and basically the social structure of your repository. So what it shows is, for each of these repos, how many contributors were there? And the more read it is, the more shared it is. And that was not the objective of this tool, because the objective was to measure code health. So what it shows, for instance, is, well, there's this very big red bulb that will show you that there's the presence of a God class, because there's 58 authors contributing to one repository, which is very big. So that's a code smell. But what it also shows me is, wow, there's very few people contributing to logging. So it might be that they're in a DevOps transformation, but it really still sounds like there's this one person on the team still doing the job, because nobody else is contributing to the logging part, which is something you should discuss. And it also shows, like, hey, there's two interesting projects down there, which are maybe prima donnas, because these are people working in isolation. There's nobody else contributing to it. So maybe somebody's doing some innovative work or whatever, but it would be nice to pair up with somebody, to even maybe take along somebody for mentoring, or just for sharing, or for basically making sure that you're aligned. Working together really works better than working in isolation. So it would be cool if the repos are going to start telling you what's going on socially in your team. And this is what we built our observability system on. So this is where we are with our company right now. We thought of every little piece of measurement that we can derive from our repositories that will tell us something about the social structure of the team. And when you start thinking about that, it actually shows that there's very many factors that you can derive from this code base, which is really work in progress. So we have around 35 of these measurements actually in production right now, and the rest is still under development. But it's going to be cool. And this is what it looks like. So you're able to click on any one of these measurements and open the dashboard and show where you are in your team performance in comparison to other teams, where you don't know how to identify these other teams, because we don't want this to be a managerial tool. We actually want every developer team to, or we trust every developer team to want to become better. And that means that when you have an idea of where you are, just as a ranking, so you can only identify yourself, and we don't give access to any of the managers, then people can start thinking about it, discussing it, and start thinking, hey, how can I improve this? And that also comes with explanation, because just knowing the measurement is worth nothing if you don't know how to act on it, how to improve it. So for every one of these factors, we also say, hey, what are the engineering practices if you want to improve this measurement? How can you make it better? So this is one of the examples of the metric cards that we have attached to that. If you want to do some further reading, social network mapping is still a relatively new field, but there's a whole bunch of projects being active on innovation on this part. Very cool is that they're trying to actually identify social depth in open source communities, which means that you're unable to talk to the open source community, because that's not a team of people that you can get in a room together. So they are basing that only on identifying community smells from the repositories, which is, I think, a very nice way forward. So what can you do when you want to decrease your social depth? So now you've incurred it, you know how to identify it, and now you want to do something about it, naturally. So the thing is, you have to solve the right problem with the right approach. If you are able to identify that there's a community smell in your team, that means that you're able to take the right approach, basically. And an example of that is this. So we were in a team, and we were facing a lot of dependencies that were lacking behind in updates, in patching. So it was not that there were dependencies where there were critical CVEs, because those were patched immediately. But we were behind, and we thought, well, it's much nicer to be updated, because then whenever a CVE comes our way, we can immediately fix it without a big impact. So basically, the culture, the values that we have is patch immediately. And we were lacking behind. So what did one of the developers in the team do? Well, he thought, well, I'm going to make a nice overview that is pushed to Confluence that will tell you exactly which repository should get what update. And it will also already create a PR, and you only need to approve it. So there's a page, and you only need to click on it. You need to say, yes, the unit tests were already run, all the integration tests were already run, so you only needed to approve it. And then the funny thing was, nobody did it. And that was because it was not a technical issue. It was not an overview issue. It was the lack of ownership and the lack of shared values that was behind it. So we failed to explain why it is so important to be up to date. We failed to agree on a collaboration model. Who is owning what update? How often do we do it? How do we communicate about it? Where can you find this dashboard? So tech is not the solution. It should have been a conversation within the team. And this dashboard was actually a waste of time. Another example is what we did is to find out team cohesion. So there was a team where one person said, well, I'm always the one pushing for change. I'm always the one pushing for progress. Everybody is just behind the wagon, and I'm the only one in front of the wagon. That's how I feel. So we did a whole personality exercise, and this is what's called Belbin. Belbin is a model to identify personalities, and everybody has 2 or 3 preferred personalities. So you do a test, and then we mapped every one of these people with their initials to this model. And then it showed, what was really nice is that there was only one person who is a shaper. There was only one person who is a coordinator, and nobody was a resource investigator. And that mapped actually perfectly to what we were observing, because this one guy who said, I'm always the one trying to push progress, well, that was the one guy who had a coordinator and a shaper role. And the shaper role is somebody who comes from ideas to execution. And the coordinator role is the one who makes agreements how to plan that. So it was very clear in the team composition, yes, of course you're going to feel alone there, because you're the only person who has a personality to address these issues. The other thing, the resource investigator. A resource investigator is the person, if you want to solve something, it's the person who looks at other teams. Hey, did you also have this problem, and how did you solve it? So it was very prone to reinvent the wheel, because nobody had an outside focus. What we did afterwards is not change the team. We simply made the team aware. Like, hey, there's very little focus on these things. So who is willing, outside of their comfort zone, to focus actually on making sure that this one person is not alone in coordinating and shaping? And who will make sure that we're going to reach out to other teams whenever we have something that's changing, because we don't need this internal focus. It's not healthy for us. And then for every one of these roles, people raised their hands, various people, which was cool because people got to learn a lot, got to develop themselves. But it also really solved the team composition issue. It solved the gaps. The same goes for culture problems. So when you have a culture problem, that's basically the moment where you have progressed from community smells to social depth to a progressive impact, because the impact becomes bigger and bigger as you're going. So that means that you are in trouble, because then the only thing you can do is actually start running a culture program. Once you're there, it's really hard. So try to prevent that, and that is done via attention to culture, especially for new people. So start doing storytelling. This is how our culture works. Start making sure that you have these conversations. Like, hey, what is the why behind me trying to focus on this certain pattern of behavior? Because if you start explaining the why, you're investing a little bit in culture time again and time again. And of course, make sure that people are mastering soft skills, because we focus a lot on hard skills, and the soft skills actually are the things that will help you identify your social debt, and it will also help you solve social debt. If you look for an overview of all the soft skills, and if you look how to actually grow and master them, there's very little, surprisingly little knowledge on that. There's not one graph that I found that says these are all the soft skills that you should master. That is a reliable set. So I created this model myself because I really couldn't find it. And I put it in 4 segments. So one is guiding yourself. So when you want to be well-performing, if you want to be basically a happy professional, then you need to master these soft skills. Because that's needed to do your own job. If you want to extend your impact to also guiding peers, that means that you have to start understanding how to make a connection to a peer, how to mentor, how to teach, how to appreciate, how to give feedback, how to motivate, how to handle conflict, how to provide intervision to people. If you even want to extend that broader, you need to start understanding how to guide your team, and that's a different set of soft skills. Because in a team, you need to understand something about the team composition, like I just explained. You need to start understanding how to guide team consent, how to handle conflict between people, so how to mediate, how to guide decision-making, how to provide people context, how to build effective communication patterns, how to build effective collaboration patterns, and even how to apply situational leadership, because some situations ask for a different way of being a leader than other situations. And then eventually you can even have to master soft skills to guide organizations. So for instance, when you're working from your company for a customer, business to business, that means that you will have to understand how to negotiate, how to influence, how to be commercially aware. What things can you say and what things can't you say? Mastering these soft skills is a journey. And it really starts with inviting people to think, what is the thing that would help me to my next step? And then start committing to that journey. Because soft skills is really not a training. It's something that you can provide some awareness on, but on top of that, it will take a lot of practice and a lot of feedback to actually start mastering this skill. And the one thing I want to add is you have to repay as early as possible, because social debt has a very progressive characteristic to it. So at the start, it can be solved by a conversation like, hey, sorry, I didn't really share the context well. Let me try better. You can share the context, no harm done. When you repeatedly fail to share context, it means that it becomes a pattern. And there's a community smell. If you continue, it will become a team-level culture thing. And in the end, it will become ingrained in your culture and very hard to change. And a recent example that we had was a team. So we work in customer teams. And a customer team is the main unit of organization in our company. And in this one customer team, there was sort of a deviation of this model because it started as 3 customer teams, though it had the same customer. And then the funny thing was that any one of these teams were choosing their own cloud. Of course, they chose 3 different ones. They were all choosing their own tech. So we had massive deviations. So we have 3 clouds, 3 languages, 2 BI tools, 2 data lakes, 2 ticketing systems, 3 version controlling systems. It's maximum variety. And then we thought, well, we made a mistake. We should not have made that 3 teams, so we're going to make it 1. So the result, obviously, is that people say, yeah, good idea, as long as we use my tech. I'm not going to change. So there's massive conflict. There's massive people saying, hey, you need to use my solution. So this is called a community smell called solution defiance, where people are really polarized. They're not listening to each other why one maybe is better than the other. They're not even open to allowing it to continue with different tech stacks, but still working together. because people now, in a social debt way, are kind of opponents, and they're just defying each other's choices and each other's solutions. And so this is the progressive effect of social debt. Because we let this go on for 2 years before we started changing it, it is now very solid and very hard to change. So this is an introduction to social debt. I told you something about the impact, something about the causes, how to identify it, how to repay it. And what I hope as key takeaways, as I said, it's a very young topic. So that means that I hope that I brought some awareness of the concept of social debt. So that you leave here thinking, hey, whenever I see a technical issue, maybe I should pay attention whether there's a social issue underneath it. It also means that I hope that you get the opportunity to deep dive into social debt. Whenever you get curious, like, hey, what's behind this? You now find the words to Google. Now you know, like, hey, I can look at community smells. I can look at certain soft skills that may help to actually identify the underlying cause that's hitting my team. I hope that you raise some more awareness on your position as a leader, because each one of you is a leader, and how to mentor change and how to master soft skills. I hope that you have some awareness on the critical team factors, because you need to pay attention to all these factors in a combination. That you can start discussing and reflecting on social debt in your team. And maybe, but that's hoping for a lot, maybe you will try to start measuring and observing them from your repositories, because I think that's where a very cool solution is, and where basically leadership becomes observable, which hasn't been the case up until now. And that's all I have. I even have time for questions.